Dennis, it's great to see you today.
Great to see you, Jason. Thanks for having me.
Dennis, it's great to see you. You have a wildly popular YouTube channel that deals with a lot of different things. And before, you used to also be a pilot for Ukrainian National Airlines. I'd be really curious, though, what you make of the aviation situation today for Russia. It seems they're having a lot of problems with their airplanes. Have you been catching that news?
Yeah. Was monitoring the news about not a long time ago, they launched again the strike on Ukraine using strategic aviation, all of those cruise missiles. Now they use more Tupolev 160 because those airplanes were not touched by the spiderweb operation mainly. Ukraine focused on Tupolev 95, which Russia used before. Tupolev 95 is older than 160, but now Russia uses 160 more. However, it seems like they have more issues than Tupolev 95s, which were used. For example, there were 3 of the airplanes during the recent strike on Ukraine which malfunctioned, so they were not able to perform their mission. From what I know, one airplane, and we have this also published from Ukrainian intelligence, one of the airplanes had issues with launching the cruise missile. It happened over the Caspian Sea, as far as I remember. So it returned back with those missiles to the airfield of Engels. The other one wasn't able to take off for unknown reason, but it was definitely a technical reason. And so it tells a lot about some of the maintenance issues, even with the Soviet-produced airplanes, which Russia has. And the third airplane, it had the lightning strike, kind of the rare event, but it happened. The lightning struck the cockpit of the airplane. There were some of the, again, damages, even reported to the canopy, and pilots forced to return back. So they launched less missiles. 3 of the aircraft were malfunctioned. So definitely the Soviet heritage is not working properly for Russia, and their maintenance facilities, after all, unable to handle it, from what I see. But still, Tupolev 160, they were not used that much again compared to Tupolev 95. So maybe after some time they can handle this maintenance. So I'm not saying that they're losing their airplanes, that the maintenance is totally incorrectly. No, they may handle it. After all, they have resources. But it's the sign that even in this sensitive sphere of the Russian strategic aviation, which should work in case of the global confrontation, for example, because it's the nuclear delivery machines. So they do not work as planned. And it tells a lot about organization inside the Russian army. So maybe we can parallel this thing with other issues in the Russian army. So what might happen in case they should launch their ICBMs or something? So there could be some of the issues.
So how is Russia using its aircraft? Is it only to launch attacks, or is it also using them in a capacity to not just send missiles into the country, but for scouting or for intelligence gathering? How do they largely use their aircraft?
It's classical usage, I would say. Even before the war and during the war, they used the similar tactics, especially using surveillance airplanes. Then they had those more. We know that Russia lost at least 2 A-50 AVAX airplanes, but before the war even, they used these tactics. They launched their fighters or bombers very close to Ukrainian border, or sometimes they use it also close to NATO border. And behind those bombers, they launch AVAX airplane or any sort of the surveillance that gathers the information about the ground targets, which potentially could be targeted later in case of the war escalation confrontation. That is what they use. So Russian aviation, as we know, is operating in Ukraine, dropping gliding bombs and so on. And they want to, with surveillance airplanes located behind the front lines, they want to spot the location of Ukrainian Patriot systems, which are aimed towards those fighter jets. And that's how Ukraine actually, it's not very, very public there, but after all, images were shared the last year that Ukraine lost, Ukrainian Government was not public about it, but also in analytics, we all understand that images were published with destroyed Ukrainian Patriot launchers. It happened like that. So Russia spotted those Patriots with the help of surveillance. Then they send their drones, surveillance drones, and then they send a strike using their ballistic missile Iskander. I know how it works because actually even my grandpa was a pilot. He was flying in the Soviet army, surveillance airplane Antonov 12. By the time it was very old during Iran-Iraq war. So before the war, they operated like that. So bombers, those Tupolev 95s, they're very old. They were flying close to Iranian airspace, and surveillance airplane was just highlighting all of the radars, all of the launching spots for air defense. And after then the war starts, those are the primary targets, and that's how Russia operates right now.
That's really interesting. So aviation runs in the family. What is that is very interesting, but I'd be curious what you also make of the number of flights that we see near Crimea on a regular basis with Basidian and others. What's going on there? Why are there so many regular flights by NATO aircraft over the Black Sea and Crimea? What do you think that is?
Well, there was the gap, and I think they're happening regularly during the war, but there was the gap then for the few months, and then they restart to fly once again. It's Poseidon, the variant of Boeing 737 aircraft, which equipped with lots of the radars. It flies in the Black Sea. It flies also close to, I think I spotted it 2 days ago, close to Murmansk. Well, they fly like that, yeah. So United States, they have different practice. They do not use bombers or fighter jets to operate. But still, they use surveillance aircraft close to the Russian bases. I think maybe they send some of the information to Ukrainian side about maybe Russian operation of their strategic aviation, or maybe they send information about the Russian bases in Belbek, because Ukraine also was focused on Crimean strikes a couple of days ago, hitting even Belbek base, the main one for Russian fighter jet aviation.
So overall, though, how would you say in this war things are changing with the use of aviation? How's it changed in the past 3 years? When the war began, of course, Ukraine did not have things like the F-16. It finally got them. Has that changed how Ukraine is able to prosecute this war? Or in the case of the Russians, their own technical problems, which seem to get worse all the time, and the problems that they're just having internally in the country, how is that changing how this war is fought? Or has Russia learned lessons, and that is changing how it applies its use of aviation in the course of the war?
Yeah, kind of the big question. I will try to respond. So at the very beginning of the war, Russia had the pure intelligence gathered. They thought that Ukraine is in lack of the air defense systems and also its own aviation. Yeah, Ukrainian aviation was, and for now it is still limited compared to the Russian one. But Russia was underestimated Ukraine. Then they attacked Ukraine with their main air force, and they had tremendous losses. After it, they decided not to send aviation that massively, and we see that they are not sending it inside Ukraine deeply. They operate just gliding bombs, mostly on their occupied territories of Ukraine, over those and over Russian territories. They send the gliding bombs to Ukrainian positions. That's it. Nothing else we see. But before, they tried to really gather air superiority over all of the Ukraine, but it didn't work. And that was the main reason, actually, for Ukraine to sustain this war for such a long period of time, because Russia has tremendous number of the airplane in their fleet compared to Ukraine. So if they gather the aviation air superiority, it would be very hard for Ukraine to resist, definitely. And as for Ukrainian F-16s, which were transferred to Ukraine, I wish we had more, but now Ukraine is forced to operate those just behind the front lines, shutting down cruise missiles and Shahed drones, just because, to conquer Russian aviation, and they have really advanced jets like Sukhoi 35. It's way better than F-16. So Ukraine has to definitely operate with many of the F-16s at one time. and Ukraine doesn't have that large number of the airplanes for now.
So I just looked up the statistics earlier this morning, and I see that in fact during the course of this war, it is estimated that Russia, according to British intelligence, has lost about 135 military aircraft and over 30 Su-34s. I see that that was also consistent with what Voice of America found. It said about 136 military aircraft and 151 helicopters were lost by Russia in the course of this war. What do you make of that? It seems that Russian airplanes are crashing a lot. What's going on? Why are Russian aircraft blowing up so often?
Well, first of all, Ukrainian air defense at the very beginning of the war, then there was the time that Ukraine used Patriot air defense systems very close to the front lines, but stopped using those after the loss of the Patriot launchers. So there was the period when Russia was losing 5 aircraft per day, 3 aircraft per day. So every day there were tremendous losses of the Russian fighters, bombers, Sukhoi 34. So I think it is connected with the usage, with the prompt usage of the air defense. But finally, as I told you, Russia find out how to deal with Patriot systems if they are deployed close. So they basically use surveillance drones, launch those, and target Patriot with the help of Iskander missiles, ballistic missiles, which Ukraine doesn't have. Ballistic missile which able to fly for at least 550 kilometers. Yeah. So I think initial losses were hard for Russia. Also, the proper use of the air defense by Ukraine and Spiderweb operation also hit lots of the Russian strategic aviation aircraft.
That's interesting. But overall, I wonder if it is changing the politics. So when I look at what's going on within Russia, we do see that they are having more and more problems, shortages of other things. We've seen there's shortages, for instance, of even ammunition, which they're buying from other countries. They lack things such as some of the components necessary to create gunpowder. We see that they lack some of the things that are necessary to create explosives. Hence why Ukraine is attacked so many different chemical factories within Russia. And it seems though, unlike many other things, aviation is continuing to exist in Russia. There are shortages. There's things that are lacking, but it's not a huge deficit. It's deficits, but not huge to a point where it's cutting off their aviation industry. And it seems one of the reasons is they've got a lot of people instructing them. Look at the example of Iran. Iran is a country that has a ton of aircraft, a lot of airplanes for civilian use that were made in the United States. And Iran is sanctioned by the United States, so they can't readily buy parts. But the sanctions have existed since 1980 or 1979. So they've got lots of experience of how to evade sanctions. And that's probably some knowledge which they've now taught the Russians, how they can also evade sanctions and continue to operate. Do you see these sorts of shortages within aviation in Russia or within the military as a whole? Or how do you think that's affecting the war?
Well, Russia is in trouble, of course, with lack of the direct supplyment of the spare parts, but as you say, they're circumnavigating those spare parts via the third countries. I think 2 years ago, or maybe 1 year ago, there was the big scandal around Sukhoi Su-30 Russian fighter jets, and then they got even displaced those FEs, electronic flight instruments, from the French company Thales. So Russia cannot produce their avionics for those fighter jets, and they ordered those before ordered via from the French developer Thales, but now they obtained those from Kazakhstan. So actually, France sells their equipment to Kazakhstan, and Russia buys it from Kazakhstan. And it's not just about aviation; it's about drones, about chips, about missiles, components. So everything is sold to the third countries. And if you check out the export from even European countries, unfortunately, it's like that. It's, I think, shame. It increased. It increased to Kyrgyzstan. It increased to those countries that continue to work with Russia on those components, let's say. Also, Russia has kind of the good ties with China. We saw it on the recent parade as well. So China supplies a lot to Russia. But to change, for example, those French-made FES screens for Russian jets, they need to change the aircraft themselves, like to change the design of the cockpit or something, the system. So it takes time. That's why the production of the Russian, for example, this particular fighter jet, Sukhoi Su-30, dropped maybe because they're, after all, in lack of the spare parts. They obtained those, but not enough to produce those fighter jets as before. Also, Sukhoi 57, there was the information that Russia stopped the production, but I'm not sure they could produce those, maybe secretly. I'm not sure, but this information was published 3 months ago.
So as a whole, when I look at this war, it seems to me that Russia is having more and more internal problems. And it's always the things you would never guess, like the chemicals. Who would imagine that there's a specific chemical made in only one factory, which is used then to refine something like oil, or is used in the creation of metallurgical goods? And Ukraine is successfully attacking them, going after these little nodes, these little areas that are hard to find, hard to detect, but are critical for the entire supply chain. Because once they're destroyed, everything is there set off. But when you look at the situation, do you think Ukraine is changing its strategy? Because when I look at the attacks that we're seeing now inside of Russia, the attacks on things like the oil facilities, it's great. It's great to see them burn. But at the same time, I think it's part of something much larger. Ukraine is going to deny Russia's ability to wage war by going after the things that allow the war to become possible, things that are central for the Russian economy. For instance, oil, we know, is 40 to 45% of the Russian national budget. By attacking that, it's a huge setback. Now about 20% of Russia's oil refining capacity has been destroyed. But do you think that's a change of tactic or of strategy, and what does it mean for the war as a whole?
Yeah, it's the new step, I would say, new step of escalation from Ukrainian side, and it is good. Ukraine should escalate the war to Russia because Russia started its full aggression against Ukraine, and if we continue the war just in Ukraine, it may not over. So Russian economy, Russian government, Russian business should feel what is happening, that the war is also in Russia. And they may struggle. Yeah, their economy may struggle, especially then they lost 20-something% of refinery capabilities. It may really hurt Russian economy. And refineries are important to produce jet fuel for aircraft, benzene. We see the crisis in Crimea, occupied territories of Ukraine, also in Russia, Far East. Well, Russia still tries to keep those populated regions of Moscow, St. Petersburg okay, but there could be also problems occurred in the future. But what Russia is focused on, they will cut everything actually for civilians and for everyone just to supply their army. So I don't think that in a next close by perspective, we're going to see some sort of the decline in the Russian army supplies with fuel, but Ukraine really disturbs logistics, connections, fuel supplies, which harms Russia quite a lot. And, their cooperation, I said about cooperation about spare parts, Russia cooperates with China, and there was the information that Russia signed a contract with Chinese to build a new gas pipeline, Siberia 2. But China's side, according to the Wall Street Journal article, which was published yesterday, China didn't sign it. So they still hesitate. I thought it was like successful visit of Putin because Putin said it himself that they signed this contract, but it appears not. China gas company cannot confirm that openly. So either they are hiding it or it wasn't signed. So, and Russia needs that market to support their economy because they lost the European market, and with this new pipeline, they could potentially compensate everything, all of their losses from Ukraine. But maybe China itself doesn't want to depend so much on the Russian gas. I don't know.
No, well, it's true. Is they have not signed is also what I read. And part of the reason was simply that China wants the price to be the same price that's paid in the internal Russian market. But what's interesting about that is at this current stage, that such a steep discount would be hard for Russia to maintain. The fact is it's not very profitable. It's above the cost, but not enough to actually be making enough to continue doing what they're doing, to continue waging a war, which Russia is spending about 7% of GDP on. And it's something that's actually quite unsustainable for the Russian economy as a whole. The Russian economy is having extremely serious problems right now. Look at Rosneft. It shows great losses in the past quarter. Look at the losses in the corporations that do things like the transport of oil, transport of gas, that build the pipelines. They're also having huge setbacks. The companies that do the pipe fitting to transport oil, they have also had huge setbacks in the past few months. Within Russia itself, the entire industry is having big problems. And one of the big problems with that industry is apparently there's a lot of renovation, a lot of maintenance in order to keep it working well. And they're not currently investing enough to do it efficiently, to do it as well as they should. As a result of that, they lose money in the long term because they're not doing what is necessary to be efficient, to be optimal. And as a result, it hurts their overall industry in Russia. But I'd be curious what you think about this. Within Russia itself, how do you think the average Russian sees the situation? How do you think they perceive what's going on in the war?
I think it depends. It depends where you live in Russia. In Moscow, I don't think they really feel something. I mean, there are some of the restrictions. All of those Western companies left Russia mainly, but their life didn't change that much. And I see how the society in Russia is volatile. Outside Moscow, deep in Russia, well, it depends because mostly Russian men were mobilized from those regions. Also, volunteers are coming from those regions of poverty in Russia, so they feel those losses. They bury their men. There are lots of the graves. There are lots of the disabled people. But the populated regions of Moscow and St. Petersburg, they still do not feel that. They still don't feel that the war is out there, and maybe that allows Putin to think that he still may manage to reach the goals of the special military operation, as he said. Yesterday there was the interview with Putin where he said that probably it's impossible to negotiate with Zelensky or with Ukraine, so they will continue to reach their goal using military means. So Putin openly says that it's not possible to negotiate right now. And that's what drives all of this war, the Russian regime. So despite all of those economy issues, Putin still thinks that he can reach his goal. Either he obtains some sort of the delusional information coming from the front lines or something, but it's impossible. We see how Russia actually failed the summer campaign in Ukraine. They were not able to gain even a single city under control. They reported about occupation of Chasiv Yar and Toretsk. Then, in fact, there are some of the streets under Ukrainian control, so they were not fully occupied. But why Russia continues like that? Well, maybe because Russian society allows it to happen. There was the Afghan war between USSR and Afghan, like USSR intervention to Afghanistan. And the Soviet Union for a long 10 years lost 15,000 soldiers from all of the Soviet republics. And people were more conscious about it. I mean, Soviet people, there were numerous of the talks about this war. People didn't want to send their kids to fight. There was totally different atmosphere back then in 80s. It's very strange what is now happening in Russia and how people really may tolerate those crazy losses happening not for defense of Russia, but for offensive aggression of Russia somewhere else. And according to reports, they lost nearly 1 million soldiers. If we speak about losses, total losses and wounded, it is crazy, and they are still okay. Like this society, I think it's something outstanding, and not many countries are out there like Russia who may tolerate those kind of the losses, especially for aggressive war, which is happening outside their country in the reason to occupy territories. And what do they occupy in Ukraine? Those ruined cities. It is coming from the Russian elite, from Putin. And Putin, he also used to live in 80s in Soviet Union. By the time in 90s, then Russian struggle, economy, not enough even food was there. Luckily, sometime American helped as well with Bush. There are some chicken supplies were from United States of America. So and he understands how Russians may struggle, how they can endure this economy deprivation. So maybe he counts on that now you live more or less okay in Moscow and St. Petersburg, so I will continue. I don't know, but he is not interested in finishing this war. There's no signal coming from Putin that he is willing to stop, and Russia started this war, so Russia should end it.
I agree with you. Putin will not stop until Putin is stopped. It was great talking with you today. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you, Jason.